Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. This is going to be a continuation of the video that I did for the Rivens and New Bros. Um, it's the way I left the video seemed a little too you're out of luck, if you will. So here's one of the techniques that I do occasionally recommend to my newer players should the conversation come up with Rivens. How do you get Rivens, especially when you're sort of strapped for plat? You're free to play. You're not spending any money. Listen, it happens. There actually is a bit of a method that can get you to pretty cheap Rivens. Generally, the way Riven pricing goes is meta weapons carry a premium and new weapons carry a premium. Um, and I would say, in personal opinion, you would have how meta the weapon is, then you would have how new the weapon is, and then you would have the stats in that order is the importance to price. Because obviously you can have Rivens that have great stats for weapons that nobody wants, and they're dirt cheap. So the combination of those three, how meta the weapon is, how good the stats are, can yield incredible prices on plat. How new the weapon is can also be a massive multiplier to whatever the worth of the Riven is, even to the point of like things being nonsensical. Like I'm seeing God for Rivens go for like 7K, and people are buying them, which doesn't make sense to me, but that's just the way it is. So let's say you don't have 7K plat sitting around, and you're a new bro or you're gaining MR. What do you do to sort of set yourself up with a Riven that is decent, that is effective, that's a nice damage increase, and you want something you can grow into potentially. It's a little bit of RNG because it's based on what people are posting. But the fact is there is a method where you can kind of deal with this, right? We're going to use the Corinth as an example. Shotguns have a very cluttered setup that they need. Like they need a lot of mods to really get the maximum, if you will, out of the build, right? So you need base damage, which we don't even have equipped on here. That would be the arcane. So you would have like a merciless, but you don't have this yet. You would need base damage. You would need reload speed, which it would be two stats represented here. You would need fire rate. You would need multi-shot, crit chance, crit damage. Ideally, two elementals and hunter munitions. So how would we go about looking for that? Um, you actually have to, and this is going to be a million man hour MS Paint drawing. Generally, the way people go about this stuff is they have a weapon in mind and they try to acquire a Riven, right? If you are, say, and this is super effective in people that are like middle MR, right? Mid teens, you're not really locked out of anything MR wise. So I'm talking to like the MR11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, up to say 18, right? Where your platform is starting to really kick up, but you're not really you really don't have the free time that a higher MR player might have to focus purely on platforming for like weeks at a time. You're still trying to progress in the game. You're still trying to figure out what you want to do with the game. So what we're actually going to do, and with this method, is we are going to roll stats, find a Riven, and then acquire a weapon. Okay? So we're going to use Warframe Market, and this is very RNG related, but I've done it in the past. I haven't seen anybody really talk about this method. It's not rocket science, but I am going to not search for a weapon. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for stats. So generally on, say, like a shotgun, the main difference on shotguns is the fall off. It is something you have to worry about. If you're looking for a shotgun, projectile beam or projectile speed is more important. So this is generally a flex slot. So we would need, where are we at? Okay, so base damage, we would have reload speed like over here. If we were to have a mod that deals with all of the stats, we would have reload speed over here, and then ideally faction damage here, right? We would have two elementals that deal with the main defensive scaling of the enemy in terms of raw damage, and then we would have something that bypasses. So, like, say, Corpus, you would have, like, magnetic, and then you would have a massive toxin waiting, right? Grenier, it's a little bit easier. You can do viral, you can do corrosive, but slash bypasses armor, right? And you can get slash from crits, so it doesn't cloud your status pool. With Corpus, you're not so lucky. You want to somewhat weak if you're trying to self prime with the same weapon. Somewhat weak magnetic, ideally in a perfect weapon. Like the Phage would be really good. Running like 2 weak 60/60s for magnetic on the Phage, and then like a heavy toxin waiting with a Corpus faction damage, right? But that would be a Riven setup. And we're going to see a bunch of Phage Rivens here in a second. So something like that would be really, really, really good against like a specific enemy, and then you would prime with viral to increase the damage to health. Not with the Phage, because that's an 8 viral, right? But you would try to figure out which one of these stats is the cheapest, right? Now, crit chance, where is it at? Here we go. Crit chance, crit damage are very, very highly valued. They're considered like on a crit weapon, obviously, you want more crit chance, you want more crit damage. Crit damage, I would say, is above crit chance in terms of like value, unless the crit chance can get you to an additional tier. So, like, say if you have a weapon with critical deceleration, say for shotguns, can get you to like 90% crit chance. If the Riven can get you to like 140, I would say that's more important than like an equal amount of crit damage, because you have a primed mod that can handle that. Now, obviously, the math's going to work out. It's going to be unique to every weapon, because it depends on what the crit multiplier is. If it's a high crit multiplier, then that's probably the way to go. Like the Corinth, for example, has a 2.8. Crit damage would be more important. You would take the 90% crit chance. Or you would take the crit damage roll because the crit multiplier is higher, but that's not the case always. So how do we go about doing this? Each weapon has a bunch of stats that you have to ignore that you wouldn't normally get. So we can actually search by, like, say, 2 of these stats, and as long as we stay away, we try to sneak in on one of the regular stats and then acquire a couple of the stats that aren't on the weapon, we can actually come out decently far ahead. So what we'll do is we'll actually, just for posterity, we'll do crit chance, crit damage. Search. Okay, so we've got stuff like a Tysus, a Gaze, Catabalist. This is going to require you to have a decent amount of knowledge, and that's why I say this is more for the middle MR players, is because this requires you having a little bit of knowledge of what the weapon is. And instead of going after like S tier grades, or like a Riven for the weapon that you want to use, this is going to be for those of you that just want a strong weapon and you're not particularly hard set on a specific one. What I would recommend is do direct sales and click on site, because it will exclude people that are selling Rivens that are not online. Because it's rude as hell contacting people that aren't online or in game. Like if they're listed as offline, but they happen to be online, they're not trying to sell. So don't contact those people that are offline like this. Glaive for 1p, good luck. So as long as they're online or they're online in game, it's fair game to talk to them. So like, okay, say for example, this Stradivar. The Stradivar is a really good weapon, but it's been outscaled. Well, this is where Rivens come in. So this is going to be our first example. The Stradivar, let's look it up. I am in the arsenal. It has a prime. I do not have a Riven for this. Looks like I had one at once. Yeah, I had a Riven for this. So crit chance, crit damage. Let's take off some stats, see where we're at. Okay, so 24%, 26%. The crit chance on this is for the regular, but it says 129 crit chance, 120 crit damage. Okay, so for this weapon, if you wanted to save mod space using this Riven, you could take this and sacrifice a little bit of the crit damage and save a mod space, and but by not equipping the this over like another mod or running double crit damage, you could mod this over your crit damage mod and get the extra crit chance and end up with a major buff. But with this strategy that we're trying to use, we're trying to save mod space. So you can see that even though you're rolling for crit chance, crit damage, you can see that there are deals where it's stuff below like 100p. The Amprex is really, really good. Ammo max isn't too necessary of a stat, but crit chance, crit damage, this should get you into oranges. Sepfon, Zazaw. The Gaze, honestly, is kind of a really good option. I saw one where it had... it was crit chance, crit damage toxin with like minus ammo max, but with an arcane, obviously using our knowledge of like what the weapon is, that's not a big deal because it's a kit gun, and there's a kit gun arcane that handles that, right? So it's more about the magazine. It's got the auto recharge. It's ammo-less, and it does really well against Corpus. Actually, the Gaze does really well against a lot of things. But okay, so this is just looking at crit chance, crit damage. There are deals to be had. Tysus is an excellent primer. So not exactly... Yeah, like here. Crit chance, crit damage for again, and faction damage to Corpus. A Toxin Gaze for 15p. This is an excellent 3+ against Corpus, right? Like this is a really good 3+ against Corpus. So there are deals. Like this one is too cheap for what it is, but it's probably fair market price because it's a kit gun and they've been around for a while. So let's go ahead and start looking up what I was talking about. We'll go back. Okay, we'll use the Stradivar. So we need damage, just so we can visually see what we're trying to do. Actually, let me use unmodded to save space. Point strike, 100 munitions, multi-shot, fire rate, your choice of viral or corrosive against the Grenier. You could also do heat if you don't have 100 munitions, or you could swap out for heat if you don't have 100 munitions. You could also swap out for some faction damage. You could also run double crit if you're doing like a raw damage build. So you got a little flexibility here. The weapon is not weighted / in the least bit. Actually, on the semi-auto, which we won't be using. Bullet hose is best hose. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to fit on those other mods. So we would want like a viral heat 100 munitions setup. So we could roll if we wanted to, because we would want to put 100 munitions on here, right? So in order to fit that on, we would need a mod or a Riven that tries to compensate us for at least 2 of these other stats. So we could get like a Toxin Riven, which I would recommend against because that is a desired element. But you could go for like an electric Riven, like electric heat, with some fire rate, and it would slot right in here, and you would gain heat. You just need to make sure that those positions are in the right spot. So let's look for electric heat. Where are you at? Heat. Electricity. Alright, Vilt, Crudo, Twin Basilock. Okay, electric heat on a Heck. Okay, that would be a shotgun. And we could save some mod space and gain our heat back, right? The heat's in the wrong spot, but let's see what else we have. Heat, electricity, status chance, minus fire rate. This would be a pretty good one also. You would have to deal with the fire rate a little bit, but not a ton. Let's keep going. Gorgon, heat, electricity. The Redeemer. Oh, order matters. Hold on. Okay. So ideally you would want electricity heat. It does matter, so you can pull the electricity off. It gets pretty difficult, and it doesn't save you mod space if the heat or if the electricity's on the center, if that's what you're trying to grab. So you would go through and you would try to look for, and it's messing with the rolls. You would try to look for a weapon, and in this case, you would want to pull up the weapon and see what the order is. And you would talk to the person to confirm that these are the rolls that in their order, right? Because we saw this before, and it was electricity heat. And if we pull this off, it requires a little bit of work, but you can get some deals out of this. See, it's the same weapon, but they're swapped. So you would have to confirm what order it is, but you could also just stay away from the elements. I know, bad example. So one of the things you could do is you could just look for, say, like a cold, which isn't too terribly popular. Doing this live, sorry. And then find a weapon to match. So like Athadai, that's a nasty negative. But say, for example, this is like a 3 positive. You could do like a viral heat setup where this would slot over your cold. The fire rate is pretty nice. You tend to run like velocity or like at least lethal tempo. So if you were to do like a viral heat setup for the alt fire, the multi-shot is pretty nasty on this, but it requires you basically sifting through trash, right? Occasionally you can find something pretty good. Let's see if we can find something pretty juicy. I was looking at Phantasma Rivens earlier. So let's do crit, or actually let's do full support. So reload, projectile speed. You can get some good stuff for this. Nagantaka gains a little bit of punch through on the base one. I know it has forced impact on the prime. I'm not sure off the top of my head if it does on the main one, the regular one. Okay, so we got the Corinth, reload speed, projectile speed, cold. So we could take that and slot this here on the Corinth. Let me find the mod setup we were using. Yeah, like this. So, okay, here we are. So reload speed, projectile speed, cold. So what this would allow us to do is we wouldn't have to run galvanized acceleration. So that saves us a mod spot of something that we want. So one of those mods off to the side that we chose not to, or one of those stats we chose not to roll for or mod for. Projectile speed is off here because it's a shotgun. Reload speed sits off here also. Generally, you can take care of it with Merciless It would allow you to go deadhead for a much more manageable bonus damage or damage increase condition. You would also get the bonus damage on headshot, and you wouldn't get the penalty of not running, of not dealing with this negative 3% reload, or this negative 3 second reload, right? So the Riven would lower it way down. It's what, 5%? Let's see what that works out to. Ooh, big calculator. Okay, so 4.8 times 8 would be 38%. 3 minus 38.4%. Okay, so we'd be at like a 1.8, 1.9, depending on how that rounds. Probably a 1.8. Second reload, which is super manageable, and it doesn't feel as bad as a 3 second. We would save our projectile speed, and it would slot over our cold mod. So we would gain 2 of those statuses back. So it would be a really good Riven, especially for 50p, for something like this, because eventually you're going to be dealing with the primed variant, right? So stuff like this would be a good Riven. It'd be obviously better if it was like 40 or something like that, but what can you do about that? Even something like the Tonkor, right? The Tonkor does benefit from running double reload, right? Because generally you're running Merciless. The reload, because you're not really worried about, there's a Nightwave mod that is expensive, where it gives 150% reload when you hit something with a projectile, but generally you're just trying to shoot into groups of enemies. And running double reload does feel really good on this weapon. The projectile speed is kind of meh, but because it has plus damage on it, it could slot over potentially a faction damage. It's going to be a little bit less, but if you're running like a corrosive 100 munitions build or a viral 100 munitions, I like doing corrosive. I would slot this over faction damage, so I can keep my Firestorm, which would be a stat that would be really concerned and interested in, because it's a projectile weapon with a big AoE. Those weapons have modding trouble as well, because they really want that Firestorm mod. So this would help boost the AoE, and this would be something you could potentially do also. Let's do other stats. There's another one that's really important, especially on pistols. Puncture. Sorry, not puncture. Punch through. Let's say punch through and reload speed is always a good combo. It's a little bit more pricey. It's really difficult for pistols. It's really capacity intensive for pistols to get punch through on, because they essentially only have one mod. And it's a 15 capacity. You're not going to see this pop up too much, but occasionally you can find it on here. It's more of a rifle thing. Like the Catch Moon, not too big of a deal. It's got the projectile, right? But say like the Tenet Spirex could potentially be usable. There aren't really too many good examples. I guess we'll have to go to all. Like the Dara, okay, punch through, reload speed, multi-shot. Let's see what else we got. The Akvasto, obviously if it didn't have the negative slash, 10p, punch through, reload speed, crit damage. Obviously this person's online, don't bug them. This would be a really solid Riven. If you were doing a heat build, right? You would have to compensate for the status chance elsewhere in the build, but this Riven, for the capacity that it is of 18, is going to give you the 15 capacity equivalent of the punch through, right? So punch through is a really cost-effective stat in terms of like Forma, if you're worried about it. And you can search for it just on its own. Do on site in game. So Pox, that wouldn't help. Tysus could potentially help. I don't like the negative though. Staticor, no. Dulcestra, okay. Punch through, status chance, damage to infested. If you were using these, and you were trying to do like an infested build, say you're like a low MR player and you're trying to get like mutagen samples for the Hema in your clan dojo, this could potentially be a really cheap Riven that would help you out. Again, it's scraping the bottom of the barrel. A lot of these stats and combinations don't make a lot of sense. There's also, say this one for the Tigress, it's 19p, punch through, weapon recoil, crit damage. These are all good positives. Minus damage to Grenier, obviously that's not ideal, but for 19p, if you're doing a raw damage build, this could just be a straight up damage increase. The Alternox, 20p, punch through, reload speed, crit damage. This would actually be... Actually, that's a really good fucking deal, Jesus. Because the Alternox, on the build for the Alternox, you want to equip Shred. Or you're kind of required to get Shred. But the weapon has innate body punch through, like infinite body punch through, and it forces you to compensate with using Shred to be able to get to increase your DPS through for like shooting through walls. And ideally, because of that, because you have the stat of the infinite body punch through, you lose some of the effectiveness of Shred in terms of like its total value of the punch that it brings through. So throwing, actually this would be a really good fucking Riven for 20p. Reload speed would fix one of its issues. It has a kind of a low reload speed, and it could slot directly over your crit damage. So like this would be a good example. Okay, the Alternox would be super solid, and this is Gyre's primary, so that means there's going to be a prime variant soon. So 20p for something that's a decent roll, if you find you like it. It's a full electric weapon though. The Alt-Fire's got IPS on it. So this would be an example of sort of a deal that isn't a deal because this person doesn't know what the value of the weapon is. This is like... okay, so say something more relevant, right? Gauss Prime is coming out after Grendel Prime. So it's like, oh, Grendel needs to come out with his Prime, and then next is Gauss, right? We all thought it was going to be Gauss. There's no way in hell you're seeing a super fucking cheap Exceltra Riven right now. This would be the equivalent of buying an Exceltra Riven a year after Gauss came out, when nobody was thinking about the Prime. You could buy this, and in like a year, all of a sudden, this could be worth something. Because it does fix a lot of the issues of the Alternox. Now, it doesn't make it a fantastic weapon, because one of the things that it does have issues with is projectile speed. It'd feel better with a lot more projectile speed. But punch through, this would slot either directly over where Shred would go in the build. It would give you the bonus of reload speed, and you could potentially save on a crit damage mod, allowing you to dip further into either a full electric elemental or a more massive crit weighting. You could do more crit damage, obviously that would help. Or you could throw on like 100 munitions and a faction mod and have corrosive 100 munitions and faction running on here, and just save this over the Shred slot and the crit damage slot. And you could save the thing like that, and you would end up with the faster reload speed. Actually, legitimately, you could probably pick this up. Legitimately, this would be a good 3+. So, give this method a try. If you are a way newer player, like say, if you're below, what is it, like MR8? What's the whatever the lowest MR is for Rivens? Dudes, don't even fuck with this. Once you get to the point where you're like 14, 15, this is a pretty viable way, especially if you have your eye to the future and you enjoy the weapon now, of picking this up. Like say this Riven right here. This would be a great Riven waiting on the Alternox Prime. A couple of weapons that I like going to is there's the Phantasma. It's been around for a while. It's got a Prime variant. It is a super excellent weapon. And the Riven rolls start, because it has a Prime, the prices are obviously up a little bit. You're not going to see any like really serious one plat offers because there's a Prime variant and it is a good weapon. But if you've been selling like Prime parts, trying to get like selling prime parts around like barrow time, and you've been like trading out, you can actually pick up enough stuff for this to where you can get like a semi decent Phantasma Riven, and this is going to last a long time. That being said, would give you a little bit of trouble in if you don't go like a corrosive build. It'll give you some trouble in Steel Path the Acolytes. But if you're looking for something that you can play around with, you know, level with a bit, and maybe run like a corrosive melee or something like that, or a corrosive secondary, where you can kill acolytes with it, this would be a really, really, really good primary. Especially with this electric stat, because the weapon is on the primary fire, is impact radiation, and it does really well with electricity, and it would really, really like, one second. And it would really, really appreciate the double electricity weighting, or electricity and faction. So this would do really well. Obviously, the infested is kind of a thing, but if you were to run the Phantasma against the infested, this would be a free faction mod. You could equip gas on the Phantasma and electricity. The punch through would be a plus. This is a very weak negative on the Phantasma. It does have a little bit of a shake, but it's not too bad. So you could run gas electricity against the infested, and you would get your combo element, and you would get your faction, and you would have the option potentially of running double faction on a dot build, which is utterly insane. Like, that doesn't happen too much, even with Rivens. Like, a lot of times you don't get to run that. So that would be super nice, especially since you wouldn't be too heavily interested in Slash, though obviously you could do like gas electric Slash. That'd be pretty good also, and maybe save the faction mod and use the faction from the faction damage from the Phantasma. Another one, I said it earlier, is the Phage, pure viral, shotgun based. Absolutely wonderful weapon. You can always, you gotta like the play style though, and this is the issue. In order for this weapon to do damage, you have to fire it and aim, and it contracts the beams. This, you can get some utterly insane deals for this if you're using it as a disruption weapon. You can get some nutty fucking deals with this weapon. Nobody wants it, but for some reason everybody fucking has Rivens for it. At one point I had 8, and I had been unrolling them, or unveiling them, right? So the deal for this, you can get, if you enjoy that play style, you can get some nutty deals for this, because everybody always seems to fucking have Rivens for this. So the Phantasma and the Phage, if you're looking for something to focus on, the Phantasma is an absolutely wonderful weapon, and it's got cheap Rivens. But if you're looking for a weapon that can elevate you, it's going to require some game knowledge. And this is more for the middle MR players. Obviously, people in the, like the 20 MR20s can do this as well. But this is what I would do normally, because I was trying for my MR30 project. I was trying to do a decent roll for all of the Rivens for all the weapons. Now, it was going to save me some time a little bit, because you have like variants, right? So like the Corinth, you would have like the Corinth and the Corinth Prime. I'm not going to roll different weapons for that. So I ended up with like a bunch of accounts with like maxed Riven slots on them. Obviously, the one that my main one is the only one that's MR30. So this one has 180, the other one has 150, and I got another one that's like 120 something. So this is how it would go and sort of select like my next roll. So I ended up with a bunch of Rivens, like a really good one. Okay, is the Sancti Castanas. Not the Sancti, it's Castanas. Obviously, this was a while ago, and this is a really not common. But damage, crit chance, crit damage. On a 49 roll Riven, I picked this up off a Wordframe Market for like 40p. And this weapon has forced electric procs, right? So you can get some nutty deals. So it is what it is. Your mileage may vary, but if you do it semi consistently and learn your weapons over time, you can look for the stats that you want to fix a situation. So, say you need raw damage, say you need status chance. You can look up, or you can do a Riven for raw damage and then find a weapon that matches. And you can end up with some really, really strong combinations. So, PSA, this is another method. Right now, I don't know when people are going to be watching this video, but one of the things that's like meta right now is heavy use of the Incarnons, and they're just so like overwhelmingly powerful that it sort of killed the need for this method. But if you're not to the point where you can farm those Incarnon methods, this could be a pretty solid like middle step. Is about where it's at. But right now, the Incarnons from Deviri and from the Zeramin are like the most broken thing in the game. I mean, I enjoy them, but let's just be honest, they're way stronger than everything else in this category in terms of just raw power. But you can still make a lot of this stuff works, and because of those Incarnons, a lot of these Rivens are either getting dissolved or being just straight up unloaded. So you can find some pretty nutty deals. But anyway, thanks for watching. Y'all have a blessed day. Take it easy, dudes.